Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome. I'm Clare Coatman, the TUC Senior Campaigner, and I'm delighted to be chairing this panel at Organise 2020 about creating a culture of innovation. We've got a great panel with us to share their knowledge, and as well as chairing, I'm going to share some of my own experiences too. Please note that this session is being recorded and may be posted to YouTube. As speakers are going, please do type any questions you've got into the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of your screen by rolling the cursor over. And we'll get through as many as we can once we've finished our presentations. My colleague will post the code of conduct into the chat now as a reminder, but I know you've all seen this by email. And we'll dive straight in with our first speaker, Heather Ramsay. Heather is a senior consultant at Good Innovation. She works with organisations who do good to define their approach to innovation, create more innovative cultures, and design and launch new products and services. She's currently working with charities including Amnesty International, Crisis, and the Children's Society while she's locked down with family in Scotland. Heather, over to you.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much, Claire. So Claire's going to be my trusty tech support and hopefully share some slides in just a second. But I'm really excited to be here to chat to you all today about innovative cultures, which is a topic I'm really passionate about. But I thought we would start with what is innovation before we dive into what are innovative cultures. And as Claire said, my job title is an innovation consultant. But when I wrote this slide, I found myself turning to Google for the answer. What actually is innovation? It's one of those buzzwords that you hear around, but what on earth do we mean by it? And there were lots of different responses. Actually, it wasn't full of process to go through. There were over 300 million results with thousands of different definitions. Google's definition didn't offer much clarity. It defines innovation as the action or a process of innovating. That didn't help me very much. But the Oxford Dictionary that I turned to was a little more useful. It as making changes to something established by introducing new methods, ideas, or products. And on reflection, that is what my job is. I work with organisations, as Claire said, mainly charities, to make change and to introduce new methods, ideas, and products to them. And for me, given it's my job, I do see innovation as a discipline and a skill set. There are methods and processes to follow to innovate and to do that. But thankfully for creative people like me, it's not about sitting in a dark room coming up with ideas. It's actually, there are clear methods and kind of strict processes that help you get there. The more I have worked with organisations throughout my career to innovate, the more I noticed that their ability to do that and to create new was as much about following those processes and methodologies I've talked about as it was about having the right behaviours and attitudes, and ultimately how innovative their culture was. I'm going to hand over to Claire quickly to talk about why this topic feels relevant and exciting for you guys at the moment.
Thanks, Heather. So yeah, just to jump in on the union perspective and why is talking about creating a more innovative culture relevant for unions. So a culture of innovation can help us adapt to the changing world of work. It helps us stay relevant when we're still so needed, and to make use of best practice so that we're helping workers to the absolute best of our ability. I think it's worth saying that in my experience in the trade union movement, sometimes there can be a little bit of suspicion about what we see as maybe private sector techniques. And I think that sometimes innovation can get lumped in with that. And certainly my perspective is that techniques or approaches like innovation are in themselves usually neutral, and it tends to be all in how you use them. And so, for example, a company like Amazon can use technology to great harm with its workers, whereas unions could use that same technology to do good for workers. It's also worth saying that there's a range of people here with us in the virtual room, and we're all going to talk partly about culture for organisations and partly about culture for individuals. So whether you're a union officer or a rep, maybe not absolutely everything will be relevant for everyone, but there will be something for you, and hopefully it will be interesting and everyone will get something out of what we have to share.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm not going to delve into the kind of academic theory around culture, but I thought it would be useful to try and break it down a little and to inform the conversation that we're all going to have today. Because culture can feel like a complex thing to understand. We all know if you go elsewhere on holiday or you move to a new job, you might implicitly sense and understand that that place or organisation has a different culture. But what is it that makes that place or company different? How can you make that thing tangible? How can you measure it, grab onto it? And there is loads of academia around this. People do PhDs on the topic, not me, but there's loads to read about. And the model that I tend to use when I'm working with organisations is the onion model, which is from an academic called Edgar Schein. That's the first of two food metaphors I'll use when talking about culture. And essentially what that says is that there are three layers to understanding culture. The outside layer is objects, translation, the physical stuff you can see. So in an office, that thing that a few of us may remember from a few months ago, that might literally mean the way that desks are laid out. And when you walk in, what can you see? And what does that tell you about a culture? The next layer in is the values, and that's what we say about ourselves and the formal processes we live by. So in an organisation, that might be the values that are written down somewhere, or the processes by which things are agreed or signed off. That tells us something about a culture. But then at the real core of a culture are basic assumptions. So they are the things that employees, or to go back to the example of going elsewhere on holiday, people that live there feel and believe, and what really drives their behaviour. And that's the kind of core of what culture is. And when we're thinking about understanding and kind of changing culture, that's where the most value is. I don't know if you guys have, but I know I have been in organisations that have talked about changing culture, and all that's actually meant has been something written on a wall, or changes to meeting rooms. And actually that can feel really superficial if you're not getting to the core of how people feel and the beliefs that drive their behaviours. And so that's the onion, and a way to begin to break down and understand what culture is. Moving on to, can you diagnose an innovative culture? Going back to kind of trying to create innovative organisations, this is a question that I get asked lots by organisations that come to us and say, we want to be more innovative, but can you tell us how innovative we are now? And we've done some work looking at combining, as I've said, the academic theory that there's lots of in this space, and our on-the-ground experience of innovating within the charity sector. As Claire said, that's mainly where I work. And we've come up with 6 behaviours that we know combine to make a truly innovative organisational culture. So when I'm working with organisations, there are 6 things that I look for. And they are freedom, so a culture that encourages empowerment and autonomy for its employees. Openness to risk, so a culture that supports risk-taking behaviour. Curiosity, a culture that looks outwards to identify new opportunities and sources of inspiration. Flexibility, so when you find those new sources of inspiration and opportunities, you can react and respond to them quickly. But we know that new ideas don't always work, and there has to be a culture of freedom to fail. So a mindset of always learning and understanding the value in failure. And then finally, communication and collaboration. So organisations that you see people working together across teams and departments. But for my second food metaphor, and I can't claim this one, I heard a culture expert talk recently, and she talked about how understanding and changing cultures can sometimes feel like spaghetti, because although there can be distinct behaviours that you look for and try and change, we all know that human behaviour is complex, and if you think about changing freedom, you might pick up lots of other behaviours with you. So there's an acknowledgement that when you're doing, when you're thinking about culture and culture change, it can be messy because we're all humans and behaviours are all interlinked. So we always acknowledge that you can't pick up a single strand of spaghetti and a single behaviour and aim to change that. On that note, can you change cultures? A big conversation that people, there's people on both sides of the argument. For me, I believe you absolutely can. I don't think there are ever cultures that are too entrenched or too embedded to shift. And I think you can do that by thinking about 4 principles. So again, talking from experience, I don't know if you guys have felt the same, but I've worked in organisations where there's been a survey and we've all got to share our views, but nothing changes. Don't stop at surveying. It takes real tangible action to drive culture change. I've also worked in organisations where someone in a room high up designs what's going to change, and then it gets kind of imposed upon employees. And I think that's absolutely the wrong way to do it. Culture and changes to culture should be designed with and not for the teams and the employees that you want to do that with. You should also be focusing on a few critical behaviour shifts. If you try to change kind of all of the behaviours that you can see in teams at once, that would become really confusing and kind of dilute what you're trying to do, and it would become exhausting for team members to constantly be trying to change different things. And finally, we think about changing cultures the same way I think about innovation and creating new products and ideas, and you have to be experimental with it. The way we think about culture change isn't a 3-year-long transformation program that you start and you define what you're going to do and you do it for 3 years. We try different things and we learn from them, and that's why we talk about cultural experiments. So to introduce you to the concept of culture experiments, the way we run them, they tackle a specific behaviour that we know will stifle innovation. So once we've understood if there's something going on in a team, in a department that would really get in the way of innovation, we tackle that specific thing. Or actually we find a really positive behaviour and we design an experiment to embed and encourage more and more of that. But it's time boxed, it's small scale, and so we often do them for 2 weeks, 3 weeks with one team in a whole department. It has to be measurable because we have to prove or disprove that it works, that we're actually changing anything. But critically, it's built to learn from. So if we don't change anything, what's gone wrong? What's not worked? What can we learn to try something different next time? So we live by these experimental principles when we're thinking about nudging changes to behaviours and attitudes. So as Claire said, we wanted to make sure that we were talking about culture experiments at both an individual and an organisational level. So I'll stop talking soon, but I'll just give you one really quick example of work that I've done to experiment with culture at an organisational level, and then I'll hand back over to these guys. So as Claire said, I am currently working with Amnesty International UK, who are a democratic membership organisation, so they share something in common with you guys. And what we did was a diagnostic of those 6 behaviours that I told you about earlier. And what we found was the biggest barrier to innovating and creating new for them was there was a complete lack of freedom. There was no empowerment in teams and no autonomy. There was huge, long sign-off processes, and no one felt empowered to come up with anything new because they were kind of exhausted by the thought of trying to push that through all the layers of bureaucracy. So the experiment we are currently running has been to design a new decision-making process to strip out all those layers and give power back to one small team and try and empower them to create and launch something new. Which has been a really interesting process. They've loved it, and actually the senior people that they were really worried about have engaged pretty well in the process. There's been a few hiccups, but generally we're seeing that those behaviours can begin to shift and change. On the flip side, we found that they were a really curious organisation naturally, and they were looking outwards. But we wanted to really cement that. So the other experiment we're running is designed to really establish that habit of looking outwards for inspiration and build it into existing rituals and patterns within their department. So they have morning stand-ups, and we're trying to build in that curiosity to the standing agenda for that meeting to see if we can really embed that behaviour and make it a really core part of their culture. So that's just two small examples of how we're working with them to begin to really establish an innovative culture at that organisational level. But I'm going to hand back over to Clare and Chris to begin to talk about doing that at an individual level and what that looks and feels like.
Thanks so much, Heather. That was so interesting and really beneficial to have good innovations model and perspective, having seen where innovation goes well and not so well across so many different organisations. That aggregate knowledge, I think, is so helpful for all of us to hear. So, as Heather said, I'm going to talk a bit more about the individual level, and I'm also going to talk about an example of innovation at the TUC. And so with innovation, you start with a problem rather than jumping straight to a solution. And in 2016, the TUC wanted to tackle the problem of younger workers, on the whole, not joining unions. Of course, there are lots of really great exceptions and a lot of really good practice. But the feeling, I think, is that a lot of the good practice isn't necessarily common practice. And on the whole, I think we all know that we've got a way to go before younger workers are signing up in numbers that we'd like them to. So, having identified our problem and identified that we wanted to innovate around it, we also recognised that we needed some outside expertise. And so that's where we engaged Good Innovation and began our relationship with them. Good Innovation have a really interesting model where I and others were embedded into their project team. And so as they were working and engaging with this big sticky problem, we were all getting skilled up and learning about the tools and the techniques and the approaches and the mindsets that's necessary. And this is a much more sustainable way of innovating as an organisation if you're going to bring in outside help. But by bringing in someone where you can work collaboratively, it means you're then more likely to be able to do more things in-house in the future. What that looked like was day-to-day contact, really understanding all of the techniques they were using, having Good Innovation explain a lot to me and to others, and then eventually for me and other TUC colleagues to do some of the work ourselves. So we were carrying out interviews, we were running testing sessions, we were coming up with paper prototypes, which is ways of trying out ideas really quickly and cheaply. And as part of how we approached using innovation within the TUC, our most senior members of staff recognised that innovation requires a different culture from business as usual. For example, we've all, if we're working in organisations or institutions, have quite set processes that we have to follow to do something. Like, for example, if you want to get your union to tweet about something from the main union account, you know there's like a set of steps you're going to have to go through. But with innovation, you're constantly changing how you're working as well as what it is that you're developing. And so to be effective, you need the freedom to work in whatever way is appropriate at the time. And you can't get sign off or agreement at the beginning of your process for what you're creating because you don't know what that is yet. If you're really doing innovation well, that's going to change over the course of it and you're going to be responsive to what you're hearing from people. So the approach that we took was to create a kind of walled garden inside the TUC where the project was free from the usual bureaucracy, but still had oversight at the highest levels. So we weren't going up through the ranks, we were going straight in when needed to talk usually to Francis O'Grady and Paul Novak. And buy-in at the absolute top of organisations is one of the best conditions for successful innovation in any organisation. There are different ways of approaching this though, and there are various pros and cons of each approach. So, for example, with this kind of walled garden approach, we could go further faster because we had a lot more freedom. But the trade-off was that innovation didn't get mainstreamed within the TUC to the degree it could have. It certainly helped our culture overall, but not as much as it would have as if we were looking at organisation-wide from the beginning, rather than trying to do one example but go really deep with it. And this other approach of mainstreaming innovation throughout an organisation is something we'll hear more from Chris. If you're outside of an organisation, for example, if you're a workplace rep, you can innovate yourself simply by trying things differently, noticing what's working, and then doing more of that and less of what isn't working. And you don't even need any money. It could even be about trying a different type of workplace event to attract new members, or varying the time of day that you hold meetings to test when most people actually come. The capacity to innovate as an individual, just like as an organisation, is closely related to creativity. And so doing things that foster creativity for yourself personally will really help an innovation mindset for yourself too. You could try changing your environment when you're thinking about approaching something in a different way, like going for a walk. You could challenge your perspective by talking things through with someone who you know comes from a really different place on things to you. And you can recognise that in general, it's about doing what's best in each situation and not making assumptions. If something does work, like if you've tried holding a meeting in an evening instead of in the daytime and you've got more engagement, or engagement from a different section of your workplace than you otherwise would, then it's right to follow that evidence and to do it again. But you can't ever assume that just because something's worked in the past or in one set of circumstances, it will work again this time. So at an individual level, it's really about having that fundamentally open mindset. And it really mirrors, I think, the 6 areas that Heather took us through. So you need to give yourself the freedom to try new things. You need to give yourself permission for it to fail. Be open to that risk. Be curious. Really look at what it is that's actually happening, not rather than making assumptions. And be flexible. Be willing to try those new things and collaborate with other people where you can. So I would really invite you to have a think about, for your own mindset personally, or if you're in an organisation, what is maybe one thing that you could concretely try to do different from tomorrow, from Monday, and just have a go. See if you can identify that one thing, have a go at it, see if it works. If it doesn't, try something new. If it does, double down, do more of that. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris. And to introduce Chris briefly, he's a former postal worker and CWU representative. He played an active role in several local and national disputes at the same time as taking a keen interest in new methods of communication and innovation. And he took up the post of Head of Communications, Engagement and Media for CWU in January 2017. And during this time, the union have set multiple records for national strike ballot results, while also completely overhauling their communication strategy. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, afternoon everybody. So first of all, say thank you to the TUC for the invitation to come and say a few words this afternoon. Really enjoyed what both Claire and Heather had to say. So you're always learning, and I guess that's what these sessions are all about. I suppose from my perspective, when I sat down a couple of days ago and thought, how do I feel 10 minutes or so speaking about innovation, that might be difficult. After a couple of minutes or so, I thought I could probably speak for about an hour on this. So I think that's probably detail of how far the CW have come in the last 5 years. And I think we've done a great job as union, as many of our other unions and lots of people will be on now, will be recognising the fantastic work across the movement that's taking place, including within the TUC. I think that it's testament what we've been able to achieve. If I can put it down to one thing, it's the election of Dave Ward as General Secretary in 2015. And I think, I suppose what I would add to the session would probably be a more practical element to some of the changes that we've undertaken and some of the innovation we've introduced. And I think having Dave, or someone like Dave, lead the union is massive. Someone who puts authority and confidence into the people who works for him, and gives us that freedom that Heather talked about to sort of express yourself and try new things and take risks. So I think that's what Dave's been able to do for us. We've done, I think, a host of things. I could probably give 50 or 60 examples, but I'm going to centre in on 4 in my contribution today, which I think just give us a little bit of context of what we've been up to as a union and how we've innovated over the last 4 to 5 years. I think before I do that, though, I want to talk a little bit about union barriers, because I know there'll be many reps on the call and activists on the call who might be thinking that, yeah, this all sounds great, but, have you met my NEC? Have you been introduced to my General Secretary? Have you been through this committee, that committee? And I think what I would say to you is it's about buying those people in and buying those groups in, those individuals into the change that you want to make and the innovation you want to introduce. And sometimes that starts really small. That starts with improving your branding. That starts with, improving your quality online, improving your organisational work, and taking smaller steps that eventually become big steps. And I think, build that confidence in people, in you, and also, I suppose, use the union's democracies as well if you need that change, if it's not coming your way. On my 4 examples then, number 1 I want to talk about is how we changed the union's colour and branding. So those who have been around the movement a long time will remember that the CW used to have some sort of burgundy colour, which when we went on a big rally or march, it was more like we were attending a funeral procession than attending a big vibrant gathering of trade unionists. So, that was really difficult. But, I took the decision, supported by Dave, to change the union's colour. We proudly announced it as Pantone 214. You might see it as pink. And as you can probably imagine, introducing the colour of pink to a hugely male-dominated trade union membership, with a membership probably tilting in predominantly over 50, wasn't the easiest thing to do. But now, when we look back on that time and we see, when the CW turn out on a march, how vibrant and how colourful we look, whether you look at our gate meetings, our picket lines, our graphics on social media, etc., makes a massive difference. And what happens there is an example of, how when you initially suggest something, there's a real kickback. But once you introduce that evidence to change, people start to go with it. And now I can say, there's always a few exceptions. We still get a little bit of stick from some of our representatives, but, the CW stand out, and that was a real positive change that we made. I think the second example I would give to the forum would be our presence on social media. So, the honest position from the union is 5 years ago when Dave was elected and I was appointed, the union didn't really have a social media game. We weren't there. We were well behind most of our, sister unions in our activity. I think I can confidently say now we're one of the better unions online. I won't go as far as say we are the best. That's for you guys watching the session to judge, but I'm sure you'd agree with me. No, and we do a really good job online, and that's because, again, innovation, confidence in people, and trying new things. So, we've introduced all of my team get the ability to express themselves, use their own voice, use a sense of humour, have confidence in being edgy, take on our employers online. And we've introduced a massive culture shift in that stuff now, and it plays a real part. And one of the things I'm really proud of is, lots of unions are doing this now, but we were way out in front in terms of introducing live content on our social media channels. And it's brilliant to see the other unions doing that. And I think, that's something that sets us well apart from our employers, because they'd never have the courage to compete in that environment. And I think live content is a massive thing. And I'm proud that we led the way in doing that. And the third thing I wanted to talk about is events. Now, when we got the role, I think there's a tendency in a trade union movement when there's an issue, it's like, let's call a national briefing. Let's get our reps together in a crappy old hall that's cold, and boring with a top table, and basically let's just talk at them for 2 or 3 hours and they'll all get it and they'll all go away and crack on with the job. What we've tried to do with events is we've tried to have a platform and have a culture and have a way of working where we say, what do we want out of these events? How do we get people to attend them? How do we get mass attendance at our events? How do we use these events to promote the brand and the profile of the CWU externally? And moreover, I think the most important thing is how do we give every single person who's attending something to do after the event? And we've totally changed the culture. So, for example, whether that be having 10,000 people at Manchester Cathedral to greet Jeremy Corbyn and Dave Ward to talk about the postal service. At the same time, the Tories were having their conference, which was a very memorable evening. A couple of thousand people for an evening of music and politics on a Tuesday night in Bournemouth, or whether we've had 100,000 people watching our live Q&As on Facebook. All these things are about, putting lots of planning in, lots of hard graft, because that's the other thing about, I think people mistake about online activity and online organising is you just turn on Facebook and everyone turns up. That's not what it's like. It's a lot of hard work in the workplace and prepping that goes on to that stuff. So I think, creating a new type of event is something, a level of innovation that we're particularly proud of. The final thing I would talk about in innovation as an example is innovation versus tradition. Now, there is a tendency in the movement at the minute to think that social media is the answer to everything, and that social media is easy and that you come on and everyone wants to be involved in it, and let's forget about the days when people stood outside on gates doing meetings, etc. Well, our union is built on that tradition of workplace meetings and workplace culture, and what we've tried to do is take the best of that tradition and merge it with our innovation and our online activity. So for instance, we would not let one office do a meeting now. We'll call National Gate Meeting Day, and we'll have 800 or 900 offices out on the gate at a certain time, and we'll have every single one of them taking photographs, videos, live content, and we'll be smashing it all over the social media channels. So we bring those two things together. We bring the traditional work of the union with the innovation of the union, and the results, the results are quite clear in terms of particularly our work in Royal Mail Group, 3 years, 3 national strike ballots, all of them smashing the anti-trade union law, thresholds by miles, all of them well into the 90% yes vote. So that stuff's really important. And I think I would finish on the innovation versus tradition by saying, when you innovate, I think everything has to be about taking it back into the workplace or back into the front line for those who don't have workplaces, because it's no good us having these type of debates if they don't go on in the workplace. So there's 4 examples, Claire. I think we could have gone on and lots more. I think what I'll say to finish from a CWU perspective is I'm really excited, Dave's really excited, and so are our teams, that we've got tons more ideas coming out over the coming months or years. We've used the lockdown period really effectively to engage our membership, and we've got lots of new plans, but I'm more excited, if I'm being honest, to hear what people have got to say and any questions they might have for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. Really, really inspiring to hear about all the changes that you, Dave, and others have been able to make at CWU. That's really excellent. So we'll dive straight in with a question for you, Chris. So Mike is asking, some of our branches could do with a bit of innovation, but it's seen as a bit undemocratic for full-timers to intervene in branches, especially when the branch leaders are the people maybe standing in the way. And do you have any thoughts about navigating that minefield?
Yeah, thank you, Claire, and thank you, Mike. I think that it is difficult, and I don't know what your union is or organisation is, Mike, so, would never tread on the democracy of a fellow union. And if it's a CWU, I'll be disappointed. But I think that there's 2 ways to look at that. I think number 1 is to try and do it via inspirational change and showing those people at all levels of the union that it's a good thing. But some people, let's be honest, when you're changing an organisation, it doesn't matter whether it's a trade union, a football team, or anything else. There's going to be some people who don't make that journey come the end of it, and that's just an honest position. And what I would say about creating that culture is, as an officer, if you like, full-timer like yourself, is you can go via the likes of social media, Zoom meetings, online conferences, video calls, live Facebook, etc. You can go from your level straight to the front line. And that's what we do in disputes, for example. We do everything we possibly can to get our branches to engage our members, but we also have the insurance policy of knowing that we have those Facebook Lives with like 80, 90, 100,000 people on, so we know we're reaching those people. So my answer to you would be to try and convince those people to come with you, but if not, there are ways to reach the front line from any level in the union via new innovation.
Thanks, Chris, that's really helpful. And we've had a question from Amy, which is, what is the panel's views on spending time developing specific skills that could lead to innovation versus developing a mindset for innovation? For example, learning how to code and applying that to create new software versus learning about innovation generally and maybe hiring in developers who've already got coding skills. I'll go to Heather first.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. I'm a believer in thinking about mindsets for innovation, because you can innovate in so many different ways. So I think if you have that mindset where you look at things and find the problems within them and try and solve them, then that can be applied across a whole kind of host of problems. So speaking from personal experience, I pull in experts, whether it's coding experts, people to Clare will attest to, developers who built the app for a TUC, designers, social media experts. So I'm in no way, I don't have all of the specific skills that are required to innovate, but what I hopefully have is an innovation mindset, which I think is in the long run more valuable because you can address a whole host of problems and pull in specialists if and when is needed.
Thanks, Heather. Chris?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I have an interesting, a different take on it, whether it's interesting, you'll let me know if it's interesting or not, a different take on this stuff. So when Dave won the election and I was appointed, we had a host of external providers doing all sorts of stuff from us. We had our own TV station at one point. That was how crazy it got, with videographers, everywhere, costing a lot of money. And what I've tried to do is give the staff that work for the union and have been brought into the union the skills to do the job. And I think that's, for me, if I'm being honest, I think it's massive when someone knows the members, feels the members, has that connection with them. And I think people, when you're going out and you're speaking, so for example, I know I have a level of confidence. If I'm speaking to a postman or postwoman, having been a postman or postwoman, I can sit and think, no, that's just not going to connect with them. That is just not going to work. So I think that for me, hiring, I don't even think about, and I mean, this is probably a little bit controversial, but I don't even think too much when I'm hiring people about their CV or their specific skill set. I think about like good people, innovative people, creative people who have a wide range of skills. So I think we've been able to do that in the CW, but that's been done more in-house, if I'm being honest with you.
No, that's really interesting to hear. I guess I say that to hopefully make it clear that anyone can innovate. And I guess, Amy, with your specific example about learning how to code and applying that to create new software, I have no idea how to do that. That might seem like a scary thing to have to learn to innovate. So I guess I come at it from like there are experts, and if you need to build new software, then don't think that if you don't have that specific skill set, then you can't be the one to lead and champion innovation and find opportunities. But yeah, completely take your point also about having the skills in-house.
I think there's actually a really interesting complementarity between the two things that you're saying. Of maybe at an individual level, the priority for any one of us would be that mindset and having that openness and the flexibility to be able to innovate and see things in different ways. And then also taking an organisation-wide perspective to build up the innovation capacity. As you're trying new things, you'll be identifying the skill sets that you need to bring into the organisation to have that in-house versus some things that you would still bring in on a consultancy basis. And we've had a question from Wayne about what changes for all of us, what changes have you made in the way that you communicate with members? I'll jump in first, and I would say for me the biggest thing is not doing a one size fits all, and instead making sure that we're communicating in the ways that the different ways that work for different sets of people. And that means both how you're communicating technically. Are you communicating by email or by Facebook or by WhatsApp or by something else? And also the issues that you're talking about, as well as the language that you're using. And so that kind of segmentation, making sure that we're adapting for the different audiences that we're speaking to, rather than treating everyone alike. Chris, how has the CWU been changing its comms?
Well, I suppose the simple answer is everything. So we've done like a top to bottom review of literally everything. I saw another question about convincing people, and I'll come on to that in a second. But I think the first thing that I did was language, and you touched on that, Claire, and I think it's critical. See, what the union used to do, and I know many organisations do this, is they look at who their external influences are. So, for instance, we used to say, put out stuff about politics, and the language in the communications was appalling. And when challenged, the union then would say, well, that's how Labour, understand it. That's how the Labour Party likes to receive something. That's how an MP likes to receive something. So what the first things that we did was totally change the language of the way we communicate. We represent postal, telecom and financial service workers. So we're going to look like them, we're going to feel like them, and we're going to talk like them. So that was an overarching thing. But in terms of specifics, we changed our video. As I said, we had an expensive external company. We brought that in-house, and it's been a massive positive for us. We changed our approach to press and media, a lot more dynamic, a lot more relationships with new forms of media. As I've talked about, we changed the design of the union and the branding. We changed our members magazine, resized it, redesigned it, refocused it. We rebirthed our social media game, which has put a lot of investment in. And most important of all, we've reinvested in how we communicate on the ground in the workplace. So literally every single strand of how we communicate, Claire, we've had a real go at. And we're now going back over that as well to try and keep improving.
Fantastic, thank you. And Heather, what are some of the things that maybe you've been seeing clients change about how they communicate with members?
I think lots of the things that you guys have talked about. So personalization, customization, authenticity. Yeah, they all sound a bit buzzwordy, but probably just summarising definitely rings true. All the kind of real life examples, I've definitely seen them with the likes of Amnesty as well.
Thank you. And as Chris said, there's another question about comms. So Jen says that they really like the CWU's online comms. And how did you get beyond the leadership buy-in to get to the level of input you needed from the wider organisation? i.e., how do you resolve the issues with getting people on the ground to let the comms team know what they're doing and what might be worth communicating more widely?
I think there's two answers, Jen. One is that you've never quite cracked it. There's always areas of a union or organisation who you feel like, we could do a lot more in that area. We could improve our online game there. But the more positive answer is, I think we were quite lucky because in the 2015 CWU General Secretary election, Dave Ward used social media prolifically to connect with members, in effect seeking their vote in that election. And during that time, the union wasn't using social media effectively. But with Dave's campaign, it created such a buzz around the union that lots of our branches then took to social media in support of him. Lots of our members took to social media in support of him. And what we were able to do is follow that culture. So immediately after that, as soon as Dave was elected, we deleted the union's old Facebook pages and started again. We deleted all of our online presence. And we had something like 5 or 6 thousand Twitter followers, same on Facebook, but we started from nil because it was better to start again and grow a new culture than try and put a sticky plaster over something. So I think that it's about inspiring people to do it. And I think the other thing that's really helped us is having 3 national ballots in 3 years, because that is like one of the best possible ways, because everyone all of a sudden, every member puts their head up and says, I need to know about this because I might have to go on strike, or I might have to vote in a strike ballot. And then you've got that engaged, captivated audience. So if you can get one going, get a national strike ballot going, Jen.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. And we've got a question from Tim. How can senior people be persuaded into a mindset of allowing failure? And how much failure should they be open to if they are to allow for all the false fails that pave the way to success? Heather, you must know a thing or two about failure with innovation.
Question, Tim. So I think, yeah, the first thing to say is that failure is part of innovation. It's part of my job. Things fail all the time. And if it wasn't, then everyone would be doing it, right? If creating new things that worked was easy, then, you know, why isn't everyone doing it all the time? So I think, you know, contextualizing that, the fact that over 50% of new startups fail within the first year, that's the context that we're working in when we're trying to create new. But also, you know, leaders are responsible for budgets, and they have they're held accountable. So I guess the way that I have seen that work is failing on a small scale. So I think the worst case scenario for innovation, and Clare will know this, having worked with us, is kind of an idea. Everyone gets hold of an idea and lots of time and money is spent building that thing, and then it's launched. And if that fails, and you've got months of planning and time and money that's gone into it, that failure is harder for an organization to swallow. But the way innovation works should be kind of really small scale tests, so that if you fail on a small scale, it's not actually a disaster for anyone. And if you're doing it right, you're understanding why you failed, and you're able to, for your next small scale test, try and figure that out and try something different, so that ultimately, after a few small scale failures, you're getting it right and you haven't lost lots of time and money in the process. So that contextualization usually helps get that mindset of allowing failure into a leadership conversation. But I don't say that to say that's the answer, because it never is. And we get things wrong and we fail, and those conversations aren't easy. And people say up front, yeah, we know that it might fail and that's fine. But ultimately when it does, it's not, you know, it's not easy for organizations to accept that. So I think there's probably no way to guarantee it, but to work and test on a small scale so that when you fail, it feels more palatable is definitely a way to make it better and easier.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really, really key question in all of this. I think for me, part of it is also a step before around evaluation. And I think a lot of the time we're not tracking what we're doing and really understanding whether we are failing already and just not really recognizing it. And I think we probably do quite a lot of what Heather mentioned, of that big scale failure, where you pick a thing, you spend a set amount of time designing and building it, you launch it, and then sometimes it's not worked, but you've seen the launch as the end of the project, and so you're not really looking at what's happening and how's it going and how do we need to adapt with it. And so I think helping leadership to understand, I mean, it's a really difficult conversation because failure is a bit taboo and it's psychologically really difficult for people to engage with. And so, yeah, one way might be trying to get them to engage with the failure that's already going on, and then kind of, which is painful, but then say that, you know, this is a part of life, and maybe if we engage with this in a different way, as Heather says, we can fail fast and small, and that's a lot cheaper. And it's just steps on the path to then actually getting to a good place. But I think there is also a difficult thing that your question points to about persuading senior people that it really does have to come from the top, and that if there's not that culture being set, it's very difficult for people under the leadership to change that. And when the leadership are bought in, there are then things that they can do to help the culture cascade. Like, for example, in team meetings, you could have an opportunity to share a failure and just kind of normalize it and take some of the sting out of it by talking about it more. But I'm really interested, Chris, as a senior trade union official who has engaged with a lot of innovation, what was your journey? Did you naturally have a looser relationship with failure, or did someone persuade you?
What, in terms of coming into the role? Sorry.
In terms of being willing to engage with failure and being willing to try something new, to innovate, even knowing that it might not work and that then you're going to have to report that internally.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Claire. I think that probably goes back to, for me, to what I said at the start of my contribution, with the importance of, like, Dave to our union, and having someone you're working to who gives you that confidence and that freedom to make those mistakes. So I think that's the first thing. So not feeling as if, like, you're under pressure when you come up with a new idea, feeling as if you've got that space to develop it. I think spot on from Heather in terms of, and yourself in terms of starting small. I think that's key. So then your failures are small and you can build on it. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that constantly review what you're doing, like literally relentlessly. So for example, we've, on our social media channels, in terms of live video, we've wanted, we've had a massive success using Facebook, connecting with our members. I've wanted for some time to get our YouTube channel off the ground and try to, run concurrent live streams and try new things. And everyone's just saying, well, why isn't it just on Facebook? Because that's where we've all got used to. And I'm trying to explain the need to, to grow in several different areas. Not everyone likes using Facebook as an example, privacy and social media content. We've kept plugging away, and I think we had about 90 subscribers when we went into lockdown, and yesterday we hit our 1,000 subscribers. So I think the other thing about failure is it's not always a permanent failure. Sometimes actually it can become good in the end. So it's about keeping these things under review, keeping things flexible. But I think if you keep your project almost like underground, what you're trying to do, until you hit the point where you're confident, that gives you space as well. So, no one except for this panel has known that one of my ambitions is to grow the YouTube channel. But we've had that, so no one would have known that I'd marked that down as a failure because I hadn't grandstanded it or, taken it to the NEC is a big thing. But now it's heading in the right direction.
Thank you. That's really interesting. It's so interesting for me though that what you're saying just points so much to, like, it's absolutely critical who's at the very top of our organisations there. And if even you as a head of department felt like actually having the general secretary buy into all of this was really crucial for your own work and attitude, that's really telling.
100%.
And so the final question that I think we'll get time for is from Gemma, who asks, for the panel, how can we get the younger members involved in the union? And thank you so much for this, Gemma. You've got me onto my specialist subject. So I've got so much I can say about this. I'm firstly going to post a link in the chat to a report that I've written all about how we get more young workers involved. So if you really, really want the detail, then please do take a look at that report. But in brief, I would say it's about going to young workers and listening to them before we expect them to listen to us. So I think we really need to understand what are the concerns of young workers, how do they want to be communicated with, what are the kind of activities they would like to get involved with. And then we also need to understand what is it that is standing in their way from getting involved. So look at the positive side and also the negative side. Are there any barriers that we can remove? If they walk into a meeting room and it's full of people who don't look like them, does that make them feel uncomfortable and then they don't come back? Or is it that the time of day the meeting is held doesn't fit with their childcare commitments, or anything, but not making assumptions? So really going out and chatting to people is the first port of call. And also, what's quite a difficult catch-22 is you need to talk to the people who you're not already in contact with, because by definition, the young workers who are really engaged and active might not have experienced the same barriers that's stopping this other set of young workers getting involved. So we need mechanisms to be able to talk to the people we're not already in touch with. And that is the absolute starting point. But then the programme that I ran for the TUC did a lot of that work. And so it won't necessarily apply everywhere, but there were some findings that, from what I've heard back from people, really resonated in a lot of different workplaces. So you can piggyback on that, but also there'll probably be no substitute for going out and finding out what are the real conditions where you are. Heather, anything you would like to add?
I feel like that's your specialist topic there, but it would be remiss of me to say exactly as you're saying, but think about applying those innovative behaviours. So yeah, be curious, go out and ask those questions, and have some freedom to fail. Try some things, try some small things, and see if they work. And if they don't work, try something else. But yeah, probably read Clare's report and listen to her expertise on the topic.
Thank you. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, no, not too much. But I think that your point, Clare, about people who look and feel like their peers is very important. I think particularly in the trade union movement. I think we've taken a number of positive steps as a union. So we've now got 2 NEC seats for young workers. So they were both elected last year. Luke Elgar, who's speaking on a panel tomorrow on TUC Organise, so give Luke a plug. He's done a fantastic job, and Erin Brett. So we've got 2 people on our NEC who are both under 30 as of right. I think we would use social media to connect with young people. So talked a lot today about our Facebook and our Twitter, but we're getting into like Instagram, Snapchat, even TikTok. So we're trying new ways to engage people. We've also got, which Luke is working on with Kate Hudson, our head of equality and education, a new mentoring scheme. So I think it's important for people to have, individuals within the union they can look up to and aspire to and get advice from. I think my final point there would be that I think sometimes there is a tendency within the movement to babysit our young workers, and I think that write speeches for them, book hotel rooms for them, and basically nurse them through their trade union experience. I was a rep on a shop floor at a sorting office in Plymouth at 19, not because of that, but because I wanted to stand up for myself and my fellow colleagues. And I think that we should be comfortable in saying that trade unionism is tough, it's hard work, you're going to get involved with rows, and we should be trying to bring forward the type of reps that are ready to be tomorrow's leaders, not people who want to go to a music gig or party, which they can do in their own time, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chris. And that brings us to the end of the session. So thank you both so much for your really useful insight. And thank you to all of those who asked questions. A few notes from me. Please do sign the organising pledge. I've just put a note in the chat. There are also more sessions tomorrow that you can sign up for as part of Organise 2020. And our night of music and poetry is now live on Saturday night. And there's also a link to that in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.